the primary reason is that the people of Africa, of whom I'm a descendant, let's say, have contributed so much to the world. They're building the world, human resource and the potential. We are allowing a whole region of people to be deprived of resources, of education, of opportunity, and of the possibility to help make this a better place. So I think that the United States needs to reprioritize and say, what are ways we can have a partnership that is really collaborative and not a partnership that is more clientelist. So certainly there are security reasons. I think there are important economic reasons. I think there are important alliance, nation partnership building reasons that we should be paying attention to the Sahel and that we need to readjust what our priorities are.
And thank you very much, Sani, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for joining us for this important discussion on peace, security, and prosperity in the Sahel. Today's agenda covers a broad spectrum of critical issues, from the region's security challenges to the role of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. We will explore why the U.S. government should intensify its focus on the Sahel and evaluate strategies to make headway in a region plagued by violent insurgencies and currently marked as the world's most extensive contiguous area under military rule. All right, so I am honored to introduce our panel of distinguished experts and practitioners who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience on the Sahel. Their insights will be key as we navigate these complex topics today. Ambassador Bisa Williams, good morning.
Good morning.
You are the co-founder and managing director of Williams Strategy Advisors, LLC, and a former U.S. ambassador to Niger. You led a 30-plus year career in foreign service with tours in Guinea, Panama, Mauritius, France, and the U.S. mission to the UN. As acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, you led the U.S. delegation to talks in Havana, Cuba, breaking a 7-year hiatus of high-level direct discussions. After returning from ambassador to Niger, you were named Deputy Assistant Secretary for State for African Affairs. You more recently led the Carter Center's effort as independent observer of the implementation of the peace agreement in Mali. We are glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Ambassador Williams, our senior study group report suggests that the traditional reactive stance of Washington towards the Sahel, focusing on specific events rather than a proactive engagement, is both outdated and ineffective. Why should the U.S. government reconsider its engagement in the Sahel, especially when it has significant interests in other regions? And what makes the Sahel important for U.S. foreign policy?
Well, thank you, Kamisa, and it really is important that we have this discussion. So I will jump right into that question. For a very long time, U.S. policy in Africa has not been a priority in general. I think basically, let's even skip past 9/11 and go to 2011. With the fall of Libya, the attention turned to the Sahel for probably the wrong reasons, and that security became the priority without thinking about, well, who are the people there? What does the region have to offer? I think that the Sahel is important for the United States, not only for our national security, because of, but for our concerns about migration. Let's do the negative column, if you will. People are concerned about the population boom in Africa. 4 out of every 5 or so people on the planet by 2050 are going to be African of some sort. And that pressure, if there's not increased development on the continent, not just in the Sahel, but on the continent, is going to put waves of people going into Europe, going over to the United States, et cetera. The United States has concerns about migration. Maybe that's a reason to be interested. The rare earth minerals that are going to, upon which we will be dependent, and modern world will be dependent as we go more into this century, are largely found in the Sahel region and in the African continent. So there are, again, security, but also economic reasons for the United States to be involved. But I think the primary reason is that the people of Africa, of whom I'm a descendant, let's say, have contributed so much to the world. They're building the world, human resource and the potential. We are allowing a whole region of people to be deprived of resources, of education, of opportunity, and of the possibility to help make this a better place. So I think that the United States needs to reprioritize and say, what are ways we can have a partnership that is really collaborative and not a partnership that is more clientelist. So certainly there are security reasons. I think there are important economic reasons. I think there are important alliance, nation partnership building reasons that we should be paying attention to the Sahel and that we need to readjust what our priorities are and why we have them.
Thank you. So you've emphasized the term partnership, which shows up quite a lot in the U.S. foreign policy towards Africa, the recent one. And so I will use that term partnership and that principle to ask a question to...
Important question.
Yeah.
And I agree with what the previous two speakers have already said, but I really do think that the withdrawal from ECOWAS is symptomatic of the same international crisis that we're talking about. But that international crisis has to do with what are the principles now that everybody has is deciding upon, and the notion of partnership. I almost dislike that word in this context, even though I used it, because up to now, partnership has really been one way. It's been those who have approaching those who don't have as much, saying, I have something, let's be partners on it. So it was really a one-way street. And I think part of what we're seeing, if there's a legitimacy to some of this disruption that we're seeing in West Africa, in the Sahel specifically, is that there is an effort to create a different kind of balance. And when we look at, if there's no ECOWAS, there's going to have to be an organization that helps to unite and create a common dialogue and common efforts among all those, number one, landlocked countries and all those countries that have so much in common, people, commerce, water dependency, all the rest. So, and I think it's the discussion of what are the objectives, and once we get those objectives, our principles, our charter, how much are we willing to implement them and stand on them? And that is what has caused the crisis, let's say, in the UN, because sometimes we're going to put all our efforts behind supporting a democracy, and sometimes we're not. So, and I think that partnership element, are we really talking with our African colleagues as equal partners? I mean, this is very sensitive. Can a U.S., I'm a former diplomat, but can a U.S. diplomat then come and sit down and talk to Mali, say, as two people who are friends with a long relationship together and really speak to each other as equals, saying, is this really the best route for you? Or, and I think the United States has been kind of hesitant to do that, saying, well, it's an African discussion, we can only let the Africans talk about it among themselves. And so even though we've got this larger charter, this context, we're going to let them ferret it out and be silent. So I think that has to be part of how we go forward in our relations. And I'm not sure that everybody is ready to do that.
Well, let me ask you this. So you were a member of our senior study group for the Sahel, and in our report, we mentioned that the United States needs to work multilaterally in the Sahel. So we don't have anything better than the ECOWAS at this point. What and how should the United States work with the ECOWAS in this new reality? Well,
actually, the U.S. took even when I was in the Foreign Service, we took a rather proactive role in ECOWAS to the extent that we asked for observer status, we wanted to let you know that we were there, and we do consultations. And I believe our government is still doing that. But again, I think that there's this sort of schizophrenia when it comes to real crisis and how much the United States can impose itself, inject itself and sit down beside our African brothers and sisters and say, look, can't we solve this thing together? And I think there's a little bit of suspicion on the African side saying, well, we've not done much else together in that kind of way, so maybe we don't want you here. I believe that the principles upon which ECOWAS was founded and for a long time worked pretty well. I mean, look what it did in Liberia, look what ECOWAS decided to do in Sierra Leone. Those seem to be okay. Linked to this current dysfunction or broken down period of ECOWAS also has to, is what your local populations and your civil society knows about what is civic responsibility, what are we supposed to expect of our leaders and our governments. And part of the, ECOWAS's threats about coming into Niger were blown out of the sky by Nigerian civil society. They said, wait a minute, we don't want to attack our Nigerian brothers. And so there was a big chasm between what officials were saying and they thought they could do and what people were willing to bear. And I think a big part of the problem, I had discussions with my Nigerian friends during the early part of that crisis. I said, well, what is it that people are willing to fight for? Because in the United States, we say it, and we've gone through it here, we've had struggle, and we continue to have struggle. But this notion of, there are some things we're willing to die for here. And interestingly, for me, an eye-opener was that people said, right now, our confidence in government, our confidence in leadership, our confidence in institutions is such a point, like, we're not willing to put anything on the line for any solution. So how can you have an organization that's supposed to be of leadership that are helping to guide when your populations feel so abandoned or disinterested or mistrustful of you? So all those things get put into the mix. Getting back to what the US do, we need to be more present, more active, and have a different relationship of partnership with our counterparts than we have had.
So what does this new partnership look like?
What does it look like? Well, it looks like speaking, it's not that expression of just speaking truth to power, but it means showing that we are there to help address the priorities that the people of a nation have established, not just the political concerns that are ours, but putting much more in development, putting many more of our own resources, I think, into the Sahel. Okay. I've always been a big proponent of Marshall Plans for Africa. I know it's a taboo term, but it's necessary.
Thank you.
Fellow with a member of Congress, specifically Congresswoman Sheila Surface McCormick. She is on the House of Foreign Affairs Committee. Good. And specifically the subcommittee on Africa. And so she's closely following this whole situation in the region and what's going on with ECOWAS. And so what we wanted to know specifically is, what you all think. I know the Marshall Plan was mentioned, as well as, changing the time frame for the loans, the repayment of loans. But we wanted to know, I guess, aside from that, what you think, if there's anything that specifically Congress can do, or what you would like us to do in order to basically help the democratic crisis that's occurring in the region.
Thank you. I love the question. Ambassador Williams.
So don't tell the Congresswoman Marshall Plan because she'll throw out the piece of paper. But what I do think is really important, I believe there has to be much more economic investment. And so there are structures that could use. MCC is an example of something the United States government is trying to do to encourage infrastructure investment. But there's some problems with MCC in that, you can call them conditionalities, some of which, of course, are our principles. But we need to rethink that. And to the extent that we can connect these countries that need electricity, that need road work, that need investment in their educational systems, I think those are the kinds of programs that our Congress can look at and put a higher priority on. And we haven't. We haven't created an incentive program that makes it easier for American companies that want to do work in the Sahel, and even for the university partnerships and collaboration on the medical front. There are ways where we can build infrastructure support that's going to help towards this human security that was just alluded to. So refashioning a specific MCC/Sahel type program, I think would be something that would be very important to look at. The notion of getting civil society engagement and the idea of populations not having confidence in their elite, the elite equals the political class very often. And so there does have to be a different kind of engagement that Congress should have with other kinds of, with the middle class that's not a political class. But at the same time, I think if Congress had a little bit more engagement with the various national assemblies in these countries, I think that also is very important. Very often they send staffers, but you don't see a lot of cross communication. Some of these, when I was ambassador in Niger, sometimes they said, we don't know how to draft certain kinds of legislation. How would you frame such a thing? And I think the kinds of exchanges on that level, how do we set up an environmental protection regime, for example? How do you really set up a regime that's going to be looking at corruption and graft in within the state? I think those kinds of things are, if our Congress were to demonstrate that kind of interest in their counterparts and in what's going on there, I think that would get a lot of people's attention, and that would show the public, civil society, that the United States still cares, because we're beginning to lose that glow too, that battle.
Thank you.